I still think about that evening more often than I'd like to admit. It was a regular Tuesday, just me and my son, Ryan, making a quick Walmart run after work. He was 6 at the time, full of energy, always bouncing on the balls of his feet, never standing still for more than a few seconds. My wife had asked me to pick up some groceries on my way home, and I figured it would be a good way to get Ryan out of the house for a bit. It was early evening, around 6:30, the kind of time when the parking lot is still busy, but the sun is already starting to dip behind the buildings. Nothing felt off. Nothing seemed unusual. Just a regular dad and kid grocery trip. As we walked back to the car, Ryan was doing his usual thing, kicking at stray pebbles, dragging his fingers along the shopping cart, talking about some cartoon he was obsessed with that week. I parked near the edge of the lot, a little farther out to avoid the chaotic cluster near the entrance. I popped the trunk and started loading the bags while Ryan stood beside me, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I wasn't paying that much attention to him. He was right there. It was just the two of us, and we were in a public place. Why would I need to? Then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice behind me. Calm, casual, like a dad calling his kid after soccer practice. "Come on, buddy, let's go." I turned, and for a split second my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Ryan was already mid-step, his little hand slightly raised as if he was about to take the stranger's. An older man, maybe late 50s, early 60s, stood just a few feet away, extending his hand toward my son like they had known each other for years. He wasn't dressed like some lurking creep. He had on a simple button-up shirt and jeans, the kind of guy you wouldn't think twice about passing in a store aisle. But the way he stood there, the way he expected Ryan to come with him without hesitation, it made my stomach drop. I don't even remember making the decision to yell. It just happened, like some primal instinct took over. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" My voice came out sharp, louder than I'd ever spoken in public. Ryan froze mid-step, his little face twisting in confusion as he looked back at me. The man? He didn't even flinch. He just turned on his heel, calm, unfazed, like I was the one acting weird, and started walking back to his car without a single word. For a second, I was rooted in place, my brain lagging behind reality. Was this really happening? Did I just stop some random guy from taking my son? Because that's exactly what it felt like. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Ryan, still confused, tugged at my shirt. "Dad, who was that?" His voice was small, uncertain. I didn't have an answer. I just pulled him close, my arm tightening around his little shoulders. By the time I snapped out of it, the man was already in his car, a dark gray sedan, something unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that blends into traffic without a second glance. He didn't peel out of the lot. He didn't speed away like some movie villain. He just backed out smoothly, turned onto the main road, and disappeared into the flow of cars like nothing had ever happened. No license plate memorized, no dash cam footage. Just gone. I stood there, still gripping Ryan's shoulder, staring at the spot where that car had been. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than 10, maybe 15 seconds. But it felt longer, like time had stretched, forcing me to sit in the absolute horror of what almost happened. My son, my little boy, had been one step away from getting into the wrong car. And if I hadn't turned around when I did, if I had been even a second slower, I don't know if I'd be here writing this story. I kept my hand on Ryan's shoulder the entire walk to the car, gripping just a little too tight. He didn't complain. I think he could tell something was wrong, even if he didn't fully understand it. I buckled him into his booster seat, double-checking the latch like it suddenly wasn't secure enough, my hands shaking slightly as I did it. My brain was racing. Should I call the police? What would I even tell them? A man tried to take my kid, but he didn't actually touch him, and now he's gone. Would they even take me seriously? I spent the whole drive home replaying the moment in my head. The man's tone, the way he stood there, waiting, the way he didn't panic when I caught him. It wasn't normal. It wasn't some innocent mistake, like he thought Ryan was his grandson or something. He expected Ryan to come with him. That's what still chills me to this day. There was no hesitation in his voice, no confusion when I yelled. Just a quiet, calculated confidence, like he'd done this before. When we got home, I told my wife everything. She went pale, gripping the edge of the counter, her eyes darting to Ryan, who was already on the couch, lost in a cartoon like nothing had happened. She asked if I got the guy's license plate. I told her no. I felt like an idiot. But what was I supposed to do? In that moment, my brain wasn't thinking about license plates or details. I was just trying to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. I never saw that man again. I never found out if he'd done this before or if he ever tried again with someone else's kid. But ever since that night, I've been different. I don't let Ryan stand behind me in parking lots. I don't let him linger near the car while I load groceries. I keep my eyes on him always, because I know how easy it is for a moment of distraction to turn into a nightmare. And I know in some other version of reality, one where I didn't turn around in time, this story would have ended very, very differently. I was 22 when this happened, living in a small town in Ohio, where nothing ever seemed to happen. At least, nothing worth telling. I had just moved into my first apartment alone, still adjusting to the silence that came with living without roommates. That afternoon, I was at Walmart, picking up some basics. Laundry detergent, a few frozen meals, stuff like that. It was a normal day, bright outside, the store busy but not overwhelming. I liked shopping alone. It was one of the few times I could zone out, take my time, and just exist without anyone needing anything from me. But that day, something felt off. I noticed him as soon as I walked in. A man, maybe mid-40s, standing near the entrance, pacing back and forth. He wasn't holding a cart or a basket. He wasn't looking at the display items or the clearance bins near the front. He was just watching, scanning. His eyes moved with every person that walked past, tracking them as they left. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was lost in thought. Either way, it wasn't my problem. I pulled my hoodie tighter around myself and pushed my cart forward, willing myself to forget about him. For the next 30 minutes, I wandered through the aisles, mindlessly grabbing what I needed. I even stopped at the home goods section, debating whether or not I should splurge on a scented candle. By the time I reached checkout, I had almost forgotten about the man. But as I pushed my cart toward the exit, there he was, still in the exact same spot, still pacing, still scanning. I hesitated. It had been half an hour. Who just stands there for that long? A weird tightness settled in my stomach. This time, I didn't brush it off. I was too aware of the fact that I was alone. I paid for my things and slowly started toward the doors, forcing myself to act natural. My heart hammered when I saw it. He moved as soon as I moved. His steps matched mine. Not directly toward me, but in my direction. A careful, calculated motion. He wasn't just lingering anymore. He was waiting, watching, following. My chest tightened, every part of me screaming, "Don't walk outside." My hands clenched around the plastic bags, knuckles white. I made a split-second decision and veered toward customer service instead, pretending to check a receipt. I didn't look back, but I could feel it. His hesitation, the confusion in his steps as I changed course. I kept my eyes down, pretending to be focused on the tiny print on my receipt, but my ears were straining to hear any movement behind me. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. A few seconds passed, then a few more. I let out a slow breath, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, that maybe he wasn't actually following me. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. He stepped outside. That should have been the end of it. If he was just some random guy loitering, he would have left, right? But he didn't. Through the glass doors, I watched as he lingered just outside, turning his head left, then right, scanning the parking lot, searching for me. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. There was no reason for a grown man to be standing outside a Walmart, looking around like that, like a predator who had just lost sight of its prey. I forced myself to think rationally. I had my phone. I was still inside the store, surrounded by people. He couldn't do anything here, but the parking lot? That was different. My car was parked farther out, past a few rows, where there weren't as many people. If I walked out now, what were the odds he'd follow me? I didn't want to find out. I shifted on my feet, gripping my bags tighter. My gut told me to wait, so I did. 5 minutes, then 10. I glanced up at the doors again, expecting to see him gone. He wasn't. He was still there, shifting from foot to foot, his gaze flicking toward the entrance every few seconds. That was it for me. I wasn't going out there alone. Not a chance. I turned toward the cashier at the customer service desk, forcing a casual smile. "Hey, do you mind if I hang around here for a bit? I think someone's following me." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was overreacting, like I was making a scene over nothing. But as soon as I said it, I saw her expression change. Her easy customer service demeanor dropped. She glanced toward the entrance, then back at me, her face serious. "Do you want me to call security?" she asked. I hesitated. The guy hadn't actually done anything. He hadn't spoken to me, hadn't touched me, hadn't even directly approached me. But something in my gut screamed that he was dangerous, and I wasn't about to second-guess that instinct. "I don't know," I admitted. I don't feel safe walking out alone." She nodded, like she understood. "Hang tight." She picked up a walkie-talkie and spoke into it, calling for a store associate to come over. A few minutes later, a Walmart employee, a middle-aged guy with a shaved head and a blue vest, walked up to me. "I can walk you to your car," he said simply. And just like that, the tightness in my chest eased. I followed the employee toward the exit, my heart still pounding. The man was still there, but as soon as we stepped outside together, something changed. He noticed me immediately. His eyes locked onto mine, but then flicked to the Walmart employee walking beside me. And just like that, he turned and walked away. No hesitation, no attempt to linger, just gone. Like he knew he had lost his chance. I didn't take my eyes off him until he disappeared behind a row of parked cars. Even then, I still felt on edge. The Walmart employee walked me all the way to my car, waiting until I was inside with the doors locked before giving me a nod and heading back toward the store. I sat there for a minute, gripping the wheel, trying to process everything. If I had walked out alone, what would have happened? Would he have followed me? Would he have waited until I was at my car, distracted with my keys, before making a move? I don't know. And I never will. I got home that night and sat in my apartment, replaying everything in my head, over and over. I felt stupid for not calling the police, but what would I have told them? A man stood outside Walmart for too long? He didn't break a law, didn't touch me, didn't even speak to me. But I knew, deep in my gut, that something was wrong with him, that he was waiting for something or someone. I never saw him again. I still shop at that Walmart, but I don't go alone anymore. And every time I leave a store now, I scan the parking lot first. I don't wear headphones when I walk to my car. I keep my keys in my hand, ready. I don't know what he wanted that day, but I do know one thing. I don't ever want to find out. I've been working the overnight shift at Walmart for about 6 months now. It's not a bad gig, boring most nights, but at least it's quiet. The store shuts down at midnight, and after that, it's just me, a handful of other employees, and the occasional late-night truck delivery. I mostly work in the back, unloading stock and organizing inventory before the morning crew comes in. You get used to weird stuff happening, customers trying to sneak in after hours, things falling off shelves for no reason, even the occasional raccoon that somehow finds its way inside. But this night was different. It was a little after 2 a.m., and I was in the stockroom, stacking boxes of cereal onto a cart. The air back there always has a bit of a stale, dusty smell, and the fluorescent lights flicker just enough to be annoying. I had my earbuds in, half listening to some true crime podcast, when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the far end of the storage area. I pulled out one earbud and glanced around. It wasn't unusual for one of the other employees to pass through, but I hadn't seen anyone else in at least 20 minutes. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing slightly against the metal shelves. No answer. I shrugged it off and went back to stacking boxes. But then it happened again. This time, it wasn't just footsteps. It was breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, coming from just around the corner. My chest tightened. It didn't sound like any of the guys I worked with. It was deep, ragged, almost wet, like someone struggling for air. I hesitated for a second, then pushed the cart aside and stepped around the corner. Nothing. Just shelves stacked high with inventory. The air eerily still. I let out a breath and shook my head. Maybe I was just imagining things. Lack of sleep does weird stuff to your brain. I was about to turn back when I noticed something. One of the metal doors leading to the farthest storage section, the one that's always locked, was slightly ajar. Just enough to leave a sliver of darkness beyond. That didn't make sense. That area was only used for surplus inventory, and the supervisor had the only key. A weird chill crawled up my spine, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone forgot to shut it properly. Still, I reached for my radio. Before I could even press the button on my radio, the sound came again, this time closer. A sharp inhale, like someone sucking in air through clenched teeth. My stomach dropped. I spun around fast, expecting to see one of my coworkers messing with me, but there was no one there. Just rows of metal shelves stretching toward the loading dock. My pulse was hammering now. I wasn't the type to scare easily, but something about that breathing, something about the way it felt too close, too deliberate, made my skin crawl. I forced myself to move, stepping toward the slightly open storage door. I grabbed the handle and yanked it open wider, flooding the dark room beyond with fluorescent light. Empty. Just stacks of unopened pallets and a few rolling carts lined against the walls. I exhaled, shaking off the tension. Maybe I really was just hearing things. I let the door swing shut and locked it myself, making sure it latched this time. If someone had been back there, they weren't getting out without a key. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I went to find my supervisor, Jake, who was in the front near the registers. He was leaning against a counter, sipping a Red Bull, and barely looked up when I told him what I'd heard. "Probably the air vents or something," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. But when I mentioned the unlocked storage room, his expression changed. "That door's supposed to stay locked. Nobody but management has the key." His voice had lost its lazy edge. "Come on, let's check the cameras." We walked to the back office where the security monitors were set up. The system wasn't fancy, just a bunch of grainy feeds covering the aisles, exits, and stockroom. Jake clicked through the footage until we found the back storage area. He sped up the recording, skimming through the last few hours, until his hand suddenly froze on the mouse. "Wait," he murmured. He rewound the footage, then played it in real time. I leaned in closer. The camera showed the stockroom just like I expected, rows of shelves and stacks of boxes. Then, at around 11:45 p.m., a man walked into the storage area. He wasn't an employee. He wasn't even someone I recognized. Just a tall, thin guy in a gray hoodie, moving straight toward the back. And then, nothing. Jake scrubbed forward in the footage, clicking through the next few hours. The man never came back out. I felt a knot form in my stomach. There were only two ways out of the stockroom: the door leading back into the store and the emergency exit, which had an alarm. If he'd left, we would have seen it. But he didn't. He just disappeared. "No way," I muttered. Jake replayed it, slower this time, his fingers drumming nervously against the desk. He had to leave. There's no way he's still back there. But the more we stared at the screen, the more unsettling it became. He entered, but he never left. We both turned at the same time, our eyes locking. The stockroom was just down the hall. It was dead silent now, but I could feel the weight of it, the cold hum of the industrial freezers on the other side of the wall. "Should we check?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Jake hesitated, then shook his head. "Nope, hell no." He grabbed his radio and called for another supervisor, but there was no response. With a deep breath, he muttered, "Screw it," and started down the hall. I followed, every step making my chest tighter. When we reached the stockroom, everything looked normal. The pallets were stacked the same way I left them, the shelves lined with inventory. Nothing was out of place, except for the locked storage door. It was open again. The same thin sliver of darkness like before. Jake flicked on his flashlight and pushed the door open all the way. The beam swept across the room, revealing nothing but the quiet stacks of boxes. And then, just as he started to turn away, the light caught something. A single footprint in the dust, fresh, leading deeper into the storage area. We left. We locked that door, walked straight out of the stockroom, and didn't talk about it again. I don't know what happened to that man, and I don't want to know. The next morning, we told the store manager, and he checked the footage himself. Later that day, maintenance came by and installed a new lock on the storage room. No explanation, no meeting, no follow-up. Just a new lock and an unspoken rule that no one goes back there alone. I still work the overnight shift, but I never walk into that stockroom without thinking about it. About the man who walked in and never walked back out. I still get sick to my stomach thinking about that day. It happened about 4 years ago when my son, Dylan, was 7. We were at Walmart just running some errands, the kind of boring weekend routine where you grab a few things and get out. I remember he was wearing his favorite Spider-Man hoodie, the one he insisted on wearing even when it was way too warm for it. We had been in the store for maybe 20 minutes when I felt the need to use the restroom. It was one of those situations where I didn't want to drag him into the stall with me, but I also didn't want him wandering off. So I did what most parents do. I told him to stand right outside the stall door within arm's reach. As I took care of business, I kept talking to him. Just casual, absent-minded chatter. "You still want chicken nuggets for dinner?" He answered, "Yeah," in that distracted way kids do when they're bored. A few seconds passed. I asked him another question, something about his school project, but this time, no response. My stomach tightened, but I told myself he was probably just zoning out. "Dylan?" I called, a little louder now. Still nothing. That's when I rushed to unlock the stall, my hands suddenly shaking, my pulse hammering in my ears. The bathroom was empty, completely empty. My heart dropped. I darted to the sinks, checked under the stalls, even spun around stupidly like I had somehow missed him standing there. But he wasn't. He wasn't there. I don't remember much about what I did in those first few seconds, just the sheer panic that hit me like a truck. I ran out of the bathroom so fast I almost collided with a woman walking in. "My son, have you seen a little boy?" I stammered, but she just shook her head, confused. My vision blurred as I scanned the store, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario in an instant. And then I heard it. A voice calling out, clear over the buzz of shoppers. "Ma'am, is this your son?" I whipped my head around, already running before I even fully processed what I was seeing. Near the exit, Dylan stood frozen, his small hand wrapped around the fingers of a man I didn't recognize. A stranger. The moment my eyes locked onto them, the man let go, turned away, and started walking, fast, toward the doors. I lunged forward, grabbing Dylan and pulling him to me so fast he let out a startled yelp. My hands were shaking as I clutched his shoulders, scanning his face, making sure he was okay. He looked confused, maybe a little embarrassed, but not scared. "Mom?" he said, like he didn't understand why I was acting this way. But I couldn't even answer him. I was too busy whipping my head around, searching for the man. He was already at the doors, stepping outside into the bright afternoon light. I hesitated for only a second before rushing toward the exit, dragging Dylan with me. By the time I made it outside, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, the man was gone. I scanned the parking lot, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. There were too many cars, too many people. I didn't see where he went, if he got into a vehicle, if he was still nearby. It was like he had just disappeared. My mind was screaming at me. You need to do something. You need to act now. But what? Call the police? Chase after him? My fingers fumbled as I pulled out my phone, trying to think straight. That's when I realized I still didn't know exactly what had happened. I crouched in front of Dylan, gripping his arms. "Who was that man? What did he say to you?" My voice came out too sharp, too frantic, and I saw his lip tremble slightly. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the store like he wanted to go back inside. "I don't know," he mumbled. "He just said you told him to come get me." My stomach lurched. My grip on his arms tightened involuntarily. "Dylan, I never told anyone to get you." He blinked at me, confused, as if the thought hadn't even crossed his mind. I forced myself to take a breath. I needed to be calm for him. "Did he try to take you outside?" Dylan shook his head. "No. He just said to come with him, so I did. He was holding my hand, but we were just walking." He shrugged like it was no big deal, like it was normal. My blood ran cold. Someone had almost taken my child right in the middle of a Walmart, and he hadn't even realized. I wanted to throw up. I stood up, my legs shaky, my mind spinning. The employee who had called out to me earlier was still nearby, watching us with concern. "Did you see him?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "The man?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, but only for a second. I just saw your little boy walking with him and thought it seemed off, like he wasn't with his dad." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Thank you," I whispered. But it didn't feel like enough. If she hadn't spoken up, if she hadn't noticed, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. I pulled Dylan close, holding on to him as I forced myself to think rationally. I needed to report this. I needed to tell someone. I half-dragged him back inside, heading straight for the customer service desk. My hands were still shaking when I told the employee what had happened. "A man tried to take my son," I said, the words feeling foreign and horrifying coming out of my mouth. The woman behind the counter straightened immediately, her expression shifting from polite disinterest to alarm. "Did you see his face?" she asked. I opened my mouth, then hesitated. I hadn't. Not really. I had only seen the back of his head, the way he moved. My mind scrambled to recall any details, but it was like trying to grab smoke. They called for a manager, then security, and before I knew it, I was standing there, holding on to Dylan while they checked the security footage. A pit formed in my stomach when they told me the cameras at the entrance weren't angled well enough to catch a clear image of the man. Just a blurry figure, a vague shape, no face, no features, nothing helpful. "We'll report this," the manager assured me, but the look in her eyes told me what I already knew. Without a clear image or any other details, there wasn't much they could do. I called the police anyway. I told them everything I knew, but even as I spoke, I felt a horrible, creeping dread settling in my chest. The officers were polite, professional, but I could tell they'd heard stories like this before. No real crime had been committed. My son hadn't been taken, hadn't been hurt. There was no way to track the man down. One of them gave me a card, told me to call if anything else happened, and then that was it. They left. And I was just standing there holding on to Dylan like I might lose him if I let go. That night after I put Dylan to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. My hands were still trembling. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The way Dylan had been standing there so small, holding a stranger's hand like it was nothing. The way the man had let go so casually, like he hadn't just been caught trying to take my child. What would have happened if the employee hadn't spoken up? If I had taken just a few seconds longer in the bathroom? If I hadn't turned fast enough? My mind spiraled into places I didn't want it to go. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's back disappearing into the parking lot. The police had been right about one thing. He hadn't technically done anything illegal. He hadn't dragged Dylan. He hadn't run. He had just walked, like he belonged there, like he had every right to take my son's hand and lead him away. That was the part that scared me the most. It wasn't some violent, obvious abduction attempt. It was subtle, calculated, like he had done this before. The next day, I bought one of those child wrist leashes. I used to judge parents who used them, thought they were overreacting, but not anymore. I made sure Dylan understood. No more talking to strangers, no more walking away from me, no matter what they said. I started watching everyone around us when we were out in public, scanning for anything that felt off. It changed the way I saw the world. I had always thought of kidnapping as something dramatic, something you'd hear about on the news, screaming, struggling, people noticing. But it wasn't. It was a quiet hand, a calm voice, a stranger blending into the crowd. I never saw that man again. I never found out who he was, what he wanted, or how many other times he had tried something like that before. And that's the part that still haunts me. Because I know, somewhere out there, he's still walking through stores, scanning for the next distracted parent, the next trusting kid. He didn't get mine, but someone, someday, might not be so lucky. I was never the paranoid type. I'd hear stories online about people getting followed or weird encounters in parking lots, but I always figured they were exaggerations, something to make the story scarier. That changed last year. I was living in Ohio, working the night shift at a warehouse, so I was used to being out late. One night around 11:30 p.m. I stopped by Walmart on my way home to grab some stuff. The lot wasn't empty, but most people had parked closer to the entrance. I had to park a bit farther out, not too far, but far enough that I immediately felt that eerie, open space kind of isolation. As I got out of my car, I noticed an old sedan a few rows away. It was beat up, the kind of car that had seen better days. Dull paint, a dented front bumper, one of the headlights slightly cracked. What stood out wasn't the car itself, though. It was the driver. A man sat in the front seat, engine running, staring straight ahead. Not at me, not at his phone, not fumbling with something in his car. Just staring. The way his face was dimly lit by the dashboard made him look almost lifeless, like he wasn't even there mentally. I glanced at him a couple of times, waiting for some kind of movement. A shift in his seat, a glance down, anything. but he never budged. A little uneasy, I picked up my pace and walked inside. Walmart late at night has a weird vibe. Too quiet, too bright. The kind of place where you feel like you're being watched, even if no one's around. I spent maybe 15 minutes inside, grabbing some essentials. When I walked out, the cold night air hit me, and I instinctively scanned the lot. That's when I saw it. The same old sedan. But now, it wasn't in the same spot. It was closer. Just a few spots away from mine. My stomach dropped. The driver was still inside, still staring. The way he sat there, rigid, unmoving, like he had been waiting the whole time. Something about it made my skin crawl. I told myself I was being dramatic. Maybe he had just moved spots for a better exit. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe, hell, I don't know, but I didn't like it. I walked to my car as casually as I could, avoiding eye contact, unlocking my door quickly. As soon as I got in, I hit the lock button. That's when I saw it. Movement. Not from the driver. From outside. He was getting out of his car, slowly, deliberately, and he was walking toward me. My pulse spiked, my fingers fumbling to start the engine. But then, behind me, in the back seat, a sound, a shift, a rustling of fabric. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. My entire body went cold. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in me screamed to just drive, to get the hell out of there. But my brain short-circuited, caught between fight, flight, and the horrifying realization that someone was in my back seat. My fingers trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, my peripheral vision barely catching the shadowy outline of movement behind me. At the same time, the man from the old sedan was getting closer. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't running. He was just walking, slow and steady, like he already knew I had nowhere to go. My breath came out in short, sharp bursts. I forced myself to move, slamming the car into reverse and flooring it. The tires screeched against the pavement, the force of the sudden motion making whatever was in the back shift violently. I heard a thud, followed by a grunt. Human. Definitely human. My heart pounded as I twisted around just enough to see a figure sprawled across the back seat, trying to sit up. It was a man. Mid-30s, greasy dark hair, wearing a ratty hoodie. His face was twisted in a mix of shock and anger, like he hadn't expected me to react so fast. I didn't give him a chance to recover. My car was still rolling backward, but I yanked the wheel, throwing it into drive and peeling out of the lot as fast as I could. The man in the back seat lunged forward, grabbing for me, but I swerved hard, sending him slamming against the door. I don't know if it was instinct or blind panic, but I reached behind me, flailing, trying to push him back while keeping control of the car. My brain barely registered the figure outside. He had stopped walking, just stood there, watching as I sped off into the night. I drove like a madman, not even thinking about where I was going, just desperate to put distance between me and whatever the hell was happening. The guy in the back kept trying to grab at me, but he was off balance, struggling to get a grip. That's when I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed the brakes, hard. The sudden force launched him forward, and before he could recover, I threw the car into park, unlocked the doors, and lunged over the seat, shoving him with everything I had. The back door flew open, and he tumbled out, hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. I didn't wait to see if he got up. I slammed the car back into drive and took off, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. My rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness. No sign of him, no sign of the other guy. But my gut told me they weren't just going to let me go that easily. My head was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had they been working together? Was this some kind of setup? How the hell had he even gotten into my car? I drove straight to a gas station a few miles down the road, one that was still open. I parked under the bright lights, breathing hard, my pulse still hammering in my ears. For the first time, I forced myself to check the back seat properly. Empty now. But the sight of the crumpled fast food wrappers and stray receipts made my stomach churn. They weren't mine. That guy had been in my car long enough to leave behind his own trash. How long had he been there? Had he climbed in while I was inside Walmart? Or had he been there before I even got there? I sat there for a while trying to calm down, trying to decide what to do. Calling the cops crossed my mind, but what would I even say? Some guy was in my car, but I threw him out, and now he's gone? They'd probably just take a report and tell me to be more careful. And I had no proof. No license plate from the old sedan. No description of the guy outside other than creepy as hell. Eventually, I drove home, checking my mirrors the entire way. Every car behind me felt like a threat. Every shadow looked like it was moving. That night I barely slept. Every noise made me jump. Every creak in my apartment made my pulse spike. I kept thinking about the guy in the back seat, about how he was just sitting there, waiting. For what? For me to drive somewhere quiet? For me to let my guard down? And the other guy, the one who had just watched. He wasn't surprised when I drove off. He wasn't angry. He just stood there, almost expectant. Like they'd done this before. Like they'd do it again. I don't know if I was being paranoid that night, but something about him felt off from the moment I noticed him. It was a Sunday evening, just after dinner, and I had decided to do some quick grocery shopping before the week started. The store was quiet, mostly parents grabbing last-minute school snacks, older couples taking their time, and a few teenagers loitering by the soda aisle. I liked shopping at that hour. Less chaos. Fewer people blocking the aisles. Just me, my list, and a basket. I was in the frozen foods section when I first saw him, standing in the electronics aisle just across from me. He wasn't looking at the shelves. He wasn't even pretending to browse. He just stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, scanning the store like he was waiting for something. Or someone. At first I told myself not to be weird about it. Maybe he was waiting for a friend. Maybe he was a store employee on break. He didn't look threatening, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, jeans and a black hoodie. But there was something in the way he held himself, like he was too still, too aware of the people moving around him. I turned back to the freezer section, grabbed a bag of frozen vegetables, and pushed my cart forward, shaking the thought from my head. But 10 minutes later, when I turned into the snack aisle, I saw him again. This time, he was near the end of the aisle, pretending to check a shelf of batteries. I say pretending because his head wasn't angled toward the items. He was facing sideways, as if watching the reflections in the freezer doors across from him. My stomach twisted. It wasn't impossible that we were just coincidentally moving in the same direction. But my instincts, the ones I had learned not to ignore, were telling me something else. I took a deep breath, gripped my cart tighter, and made a deliberate turn into the next aisle, the one with canned goods. I counted to 10, trying to slow my heart rate. Then I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance behind me. He was there. Not close. Not reaching for anything. Just there. I swallowed hard and forced myself to act natural. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene over nothing. Because what if it was nothing? What if I was just being paranoid? I kept moving, picking up random items and pretending to compare prices, but my mind wasn't on groceries anymore. It was on him. Every time I changed aisles, I waited a few seconds before casually looking around. And every single time, he was somewhere nearby. Never too close, never obvious, just lingering. Like he wanted me to know he was there without making it clear enough for me to call him out. By the time I reached the produce section, my skin was crawling. I told myself I was almost done. Just a few more things, then checkout, then home. Simple. But when I turned toward the front of the store, I hesitated. What if he followed me out? What if he was waiting for me to leave first? The store still had plenty of people inside, but the parking lot? That was a different story. It was late enough that most of the cars were scattered toward the front, isolated under dim overhead lights. I gritted my teeth, shook off the nerves, and made my way to checkout. That's when I saw him again. Standing near the self-checkout, empty-handed. He hadn't picked up a single thing. Not a pack of gum, not a soda. Just standing there watching people scan their items. Watching me. This time I didn't even try to act casual. I turned straight to a regular checkout lane, putting as much distance between us as I could. My pulse pounded in my ears as I loaded my groceries onto the conveyor belt, forcing a smile at the cashier. I paid in record time, grabbed my bags, and made a beeline for the exit without looking back. As soon as I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. The parking lot felt darker than before, shadows stretching long under the flickering lights. I hurried toward my car, keys clutched tight in my fist. I didn't even check my phone until I was at my trunk, shoving the bags inside. But when I finally glanced up, my breath caught in my throat. He was there, standing just outside the store's sliding doors. And this time, he was on his phone, talking to someone. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers suddenly clumsy and numb. My mind raced through every possibility. Was he just making a call? Was this all some bizarre coincidence? But then, as I watched, he turned slightly, just enough for me to see the side of his face. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was scanning the parking lot. And then, in a low voice, I heard him say something. I couldn't make out the full sentence, but I caught two words, clear as day. She's alone. Ice shot through my veins. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I yanked my car door open, threw myself inside, and slammed the locks down before I even caught my breath. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to get the key in the ignition. My vision blurred for a second, my pulse hammering in my ears. I forced myself to look up. He was still there. But now, he was walking. Not toward me, but toward the row of cars on the other side of the lot. I couldn't see who he was meeting, but he wasn't alone anymore. A second figure, mostly hidden in the dark, was standing near an SUV, waiting. I didn't stick around to find out what happened next. I threw the car into reverse so fast that my tires screeched, then peeled out of that lot like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. Even as I drove, hands gripping the wheel tight, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights following me. But no one came. No one chased me. By the time I made it home, I had convinced myself that maybe I had overreacted, that it could have been nothing. But the thing is, I never saw him pick up a single item. He never had a cart, never checked out. He was just there, watching, waiting. And that one sentence, "She's alone," still echoes in my head whenever I think about that night, because no matter how much I try to rationalize it, I can't shake the feeling that if I hadn't left when I did, they were planning to do something.